Chapter 18. Giselle hadn't expected to have alone time, but she planned to make excellent use of it. The minute she'd heard the lock click on Luke's bedroom door, she'd made a dash for the guest room, abandoning the last of her strawberry waffle. That was a crying shame, but she had her priorities. Once she left Vegas, she never expected to see Luke Dalton again, so while she was here, she wanted to soak up as much of his wonderfulness as possible. But they'd pushed the envelope the night before, and she needed to heal before she could partake again without wincing. That's where being a werewolf came in handy. She made certain the guest room door was locked. Discovery would mean disaster. Then she pulled off the boxer shorts and t-shirt she'd borrowed from Luke and stretched out on the soft carpet. She hadn't shifted in at least a month because she'd been so busy covering for her brother. As she readied herself, she realized she wasn't as angry with Bryce about his disappearing act as she had been, although she still didn't appreciate the way he'd taken off without a word. His defection had brought her to Luke and a whole new appreciation for the sexual act. She also now had a template for what she was looking for in a mate. Unfortunately, Luke might be one of a kind which would leave her settling for second best, but she couldn't help that. Luke was human. Closing her eyes, she eased into her shift. Muscles expanded, bones realigned, and in a few short minutes a wolf with green eyes and dark red fur lay on the carpet. Giselle's flanks heaved. She'd like to walk around a little and work out the kinks, but there wasn't time. A second shift following on the heels of a first one took extra energy, but she didn't mind. Luke was worth it. Her wolf eyes closed as she focused on reversing the process. The air around her seemed charged with electricity. Fur dissolved, facial features changed, and she was in human form again. The time she devoted to shifting meant she had to hurry through her shower and hair washing routine. Luke would be ready before she was, but she knew human males were used to waiting for females to groom themselves. Giselle normally wasn't like that. She didn't believe in taking more time than necessary to dress for any event, whether it was a walk in the woods or a gala ball. After blow-drying her hair, she dressed in jeans, boots, and a soft white sweater. She found Luke sitting on the leather sofa looking at the picture and the program that had affected him so much last night. He glanced up and she glimpsed something soft and vulnerable in his expression before he chased it away with a brilliant smile. "You look great." The frank admiration in his blue eyes warmed her in a way that no male gaze had ever done before. Although she'd been complimented on her looks in the past, the praise hadn't meant so much. But one simple comment from Luke made her glow. She walked over and sat beside him. "That's such a beautiful picture of Cynthia." "It is. But the program is what really got to me. I was sitting here wondering why, and I think it was remembering that moment when she dashed up to us and insisted all three of us had to sign it. She must have felt so loved and supported by all of us, and now." She put her hand on his knee. "You still love her, Luke?" "Yeah, but what about the support? I thought that's what I was doing, but you've made me rethink everything." "I have." She looked into his eyes, excitement humming through her. "You're going to support her dream?" "Even better. I'm going to offer her a vice presidency in the corporation." Giselle groaned. "What's wrong with that? You said I should ask her if she wants to be part of the business." "I know, but asking her if she wants to do that is a whole other thing from offering her a top job without any prior discussion. It will come out sounding like a bribe. So I shouldn't offer her a job?" "Maybe eventually, but first you need to let her know you understand her yearning to be a dancer. You can show you understand by hiring her at the Silver Crescent. Then sometime after that you can offer her." "Can't risk it. Once I give her a job dancing, she's liable to love it so much that she won't want to quit for some desk job." If she'd been close to a wall, she would have banged her head against it. Or, better yet, banged his head against it. "Luke, can you hear yourself? She does love it that much. Then that's what she should do. Life's too short not to love your work." His jaw tightened. She might also love being a doctor or a lawyer or hell, an astrophysicist. But she'll never know if she goes into dancing instead. There's nothing wrong with that reasoning except that. Aha! You admit it's valid. I admit it's logical. But that doesn't give you the right to impose your logic on her and try to control her life. If she chooses to throw away a potential career as an astrophysicist so she can shake her booty on the stage of the Silver Crescent, that's her prerogative. Folding his arms, He gazed at her with those incredible blue eyes. He didn't even seem particularly angry. In fact, he looked a little smug. I'll remind you of that speech when you're trying to convince your brother to come home and accept his responsibilities. That's different. Not much. Why come chasing down here after him? Why not let him live his life the way he chooses? She hated to admit he had a point, but he didn't know the stakes in this game. He saw a wayward older brother who should be allowed to choose his own path. But she saw a werewolf who could create a political nightmare for the Landry pack if he refused to take over as alpha. That was different, wasn't it? She tried to tell herself he was rebelling against the manipulation of his parents and future in-laws, not the concept of becoming the pack's leader. He'd be excellent in that role. She handed Luke the photograph of Cynthia. I realize it looks as if I'm trying to direct Bryce's future. Luke nodded as he put the picture back in the envelope. It does. But there are deeper issues at work, most of which she couldn't talk about. The family dynamic is. He laid the envelope on the coffee table. You want to talk about family dynamics? Try this on for size. Your dying father puts you in charge of his beloved daughter's welfare. I can guarantee that if he hadn't died, she'd be about to graduate from Yale in a few weeks. He would have expected that of her, and she wouldn't have defied him the way she's defying me. Giselle believed that fathers could have tremendous influence over daughters. Her dad hadn't specifically asked her to come down to Vegas and talk Bryce into accepting his place in the pack hierarchy, but she'd known that's what he and her mother hoped Giselle would accomplish. She was here to please her parents in much the same way Luke was trying to honor his father's wishes. Taking a deep breath, she drew in a fair amount of humility along with the oxygen. I owe you an apology. I have no business passing judgment on your behavior. Mine isn't all that different, as you so correctly point out. His expression softened. Thanks for that, Giselle. He came closer and rested his hands on her shoulders. I owe you an apology too, though. His gaze searched hers. I was eager for you to help me figure out the situation with Cynthia. You seem to really get her. It's not fair if I turn around and reject your advice. He kneaded her shoulders with a gentle touch. Bottom line, I'm glad you're here. Me too. She saw the kiss shimmering in his eyes. Letting that happen would be so natural, but they had places to go and booby traps to deal with. 1 kiss would lead to 2 and 20 and wild monkey sex. We should go, or we'll never get to that cabin. When you're right, you're right. With a final squeeze, he stepped back. Besides, I don't want to hurt you. She decided giving him some hints would be okay. Actually, the Epsom salts did wonders. Oh, the glint returned to his eyes. Care to elaborate? No, she grabbed her leather jacket, which still lay over the back of the sofa. That's for future reference. Right now we need to drive up to a mountain cabin and see if Cynthia and Bryce have found a way to soak you. And after that? She smiled. Epsom salts work miracles. That's all I'm saying. Luke dropped his Lexus into third gear as he navigated the winding roads leading to the pine-covered slopes of the mountains. As the desert vegetation gave way to evergreens, he found himself thinking more about Giselle's miraculous recovery than his little sister's rebellious behavior. That wasn't good. His revved-up libido could take a hike. He needed to concentrate on the problem with his sister, and besides, Giselle might not be as recovered as she claimed. They were driving up here to check out Cynthia's latest message, not to find a suitable spot to get naked. Giselle put her window down a couple of inches and inhaled. Smells great out there. I love pines. Then she shivered and closed the window. Chilly, though. That's the beauty of living in Vegas. You can go from the warm desert to the cool mountains in no time. Lake Mead's in the other direction, so Vegas has it all. He sounded like the damn Chamber of Commerce, and he knew exactly why. He wanted to gauge her reaction to the city in case. Well, just in case. He was a fool to keep hoping, but every time he looked at her he was more convinced than ever that she was the one. And it wasn't all about sex either. Silly as it sounded, he liked the way they argued without getting nasty about it. She stood up to him, but she fought fair. She had the qualities he looked for in a friend. Obviously you're happy living here, she said. I am. It's where I grew up, so that's part of the reason. But I've seen other parts of the country, and Vegas suits me. I like the energy of the city, the mild winters, and the chance to head for the mountains or the lake for a quick change of scenery. She nodded. That's good. Although he would have preferred a more enthusiastic response, at least she hadn't disagreed with him about the city's appeal. Are you happy living in San Francisco? Oh yeah. The cool air, the fog, sailboats on the bay, love it. So it wasn't only her job holding her there. That was discouraging. Ever considered another part of the country? Nope. Besides the fact that I love the area, my family's there. I'm very family-oriented. I used to be. Whoa, that sounded pathetic. The plain fact is most guys would love to be in my shoes. I have plenty of money and the freedom to do what I want if I keep the corporation on an even keel. Sounds like a nice life. Exactly. Of course, Mr. Thatcher is hoping I'll get married and have a bunch of kids so he'll have something to do. I found out this morning he's bored out of his skull. So that's Mr. Thatcher's dream. What do you want? You. But he couldn't say that. A better relationship with my sister. He hadn't meant to say that either, but it was the truth. Now that his mother was in France, Cynthia was the only family he had close by. Fighting with her felt terrible and he wanted it to stop. You know the way to get that, right? Yeah, give in. It's not giving in, Luke. It's letting go of your role as the father figure and becoming a brother and a friend. The idea beckoned to him like an oasis in the desert. As I've mentioned before, my dad would roll over in his grave at the thought of her dancing with the moonbeams instead of finishing her education. Yes, but he's not here, she said gently. Expecting you to run the corporation is one thing. Putting you in charge of your sister's future is unfair. Of course she's not going to give you the same respect she gave your dad. If my brother tried to tell me what to do, I'd spit in his eye. That made him grin. I bet you would. Spotting a street sign ahead, he slowed the car. There's the turnoff. The road was gravel, which made him doubly glad he'd brought his car instead of Giselle's rented motorcycle. Patches of snow lay in the shadows created by the tall pines. No one else was on the road, so he braked the car and pulled out his cell phone. I'm sure they've left and no one followed, but let me double check. He glanced at his text messages. They took off about an hour ago. Owen tailed them too. The Silver Crescent? Damn it. They're running us around in circles. She's trying to prove a point. Luke glared at the text. Well, she's pissing me off. His phone chimed. I'll bet that's her gloating. He read the text. Game is over. Time to talk. Meet us here at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock tonight? That's 10 hours from now. I know, but Cynthia loves the number 8. We used to play Crazy Eights when she was little, and then in junior high she found out that turning an 8 on its side was the sign for infinity. And it's the difference in your ages. He nodded. That too. I wonder if they're in the penthouse yet. Oh dear. He looked over at her. Yeah, she could have a field day. Mr. Thatcher would have waited for my signal before he brought in housekeeping. Smart man, but if nothing's been done in the penthouse. He met her gaze. Then the bedroom is as we left it, sheets covered with chocolate, pillows on the floor, bed a tumbled mess. There won't be much doubt what went on there last night. She'll figure that out right quick. So will Bryce. She took a deep breath. Okay, so they find out we had sex. He lifted his eyebrows. Well, so it was over-the-top sex with chocolate mousse cake spread everywhere and our clothes strewn on the floor. Luke speed-dialed Mr. Thatcher. Maybe they're not in the penthouse. Maybe they went to Cynthia's apartment. That's logical. I don't have a key to her place so they could hide out. Hello, Mr. Thatcher? Please send a cleaning crew up to the penthouse ASAP. Thanks. He disconnected. Call me old-fashioned. But I'd rather not have my little sister creating mental images of what went on in that bedroom. I agree. I'm not wild about having Bryce check out the aftermath either. He knows I'm not a Vestal virgin, but I'm not in the habit of advertising my sexual adventures. Me either. Luke tucked his phone in his jacket pocket and let up on the brake. Let's keep our fingers crossed that Mr. Thatcher beats them up there and clears away the evidence. Chapter 19. Giselle was damned uncomfortable about having Bryce find out she'd had sex with a human, especially after the strong stand she'd taken on the subject. But maybe she'd been due for a comeuppance. She might have been way too sanctimonious. And if the cleaning crew didn't arrive in time, there could be benefits for Luke and Cynthia's relationship. Maybe a dose of humility would help Luke realize he had no business trying to control his little sister's life. This is it. Luke parked the car beside a small log cabin with a covered front porch. A couple of wooden rockers sat on the porch and a rock chimney added to the rustic charm of the place. Large pines hovered close as if sheltering the cabin. Cute. Giselle wouldn't say so and risk hurting Luke's feelings, but she much preferred this setting to the glitz of the Vegas Strip. Any werewolf would. Yeah, cute. I wonder how they've booby-trapped it. They've had hours to plan. This one. We could just not go in. True. He glanced at her. But then we'd never know what they did. Yeah, okay. I'm curious too. We'll approach with caution. Giselle thought of the many pranks her brother had pulled as a kid. Watch where you step. That's not reassuring. Anything could be hidden under the leaves scattered on the ground. I'm used to the woods. She glanced over at him. Want me to go in first? No, he blew out a breath and opened his door. I'm not letting you get doused when I'm her target. Stay here while I check things out. Nothing doing. She climbed out of the car, her boots crunching on dry leaves. Ah, fresh air. Woods. Her favorite environment. She stretched her arms over her head. He rounded the car and stood gazing at her. Would it have made a difference if I'd said please stay put? Probably not. She lowered her arms and breathed in the pine-scented air as she walked toward him. But you could try that next time and see. Taking a wild guess here, but did your father give orders? He was the boss of the world. He blinked. Of course not. He was the boss of Dalton Industries and giving orders is part of the job. What about your family? Was he the boss there too? Yes. I can tell you don't approve of that, but for the most part it was a good thing. I'm not passing judgment on him, Luke. He obviously loved you all very much. But a benevolent dictatorship doesn't work these days, especially when a man gives orders to a woman. He sighed. You're right. But I have to say, meeting you has taught me a lot too. By my poor example? She couldn't help smiling. Yep. Afraid so. When I finally talk to Bryce, I'll be more interested in hearing his side of the story than trying to convince him to do his duty. Luke sighed and scrubbed a hand over his face before looking at her again. I get it, Giselle. I really do. But for a sister to give her big brother space to be his own person is one thing. For a brother to do the same for his little sister, which includes standing by while she struts around half-naked in front of drooling strangers. Can you see why that's difficult for me to accept? Yes. She closed the distance between them and slid her arms around his neck. I can see that what Cynthia's asking of you goes against every protective male instinct you have. He gathered her close. It sure as hell does. Thanks for recognizing that. You'll have to override those instincts. How? I can't tell you how, but I can tell you why. I'm listening. Strong motivation is always good. Backing off will show that you trust her to manage her own life. After that, you can stop being the authority figure and move on to becoming her friend. He searched her gaze. You're a smart lady. I am. He massaged the small of her back. Ultimately, that's what I want. With Cynthia, although I couldn't have put it into words. You just did. Probably because you're so close to the situation. Maybe, but thanks anyway. My dad used to say a parent isn't supposed to be a friend, and he was right. But I'm not a parent. That's right. It's so damn simple, Giselle. I'm not her parent. Happiness bubbled within her as the sparkle returned to his blue eyes. Congratulations, Luke. I think that was an honest-to-goodness breakthrough. Yep, it is. He beamed at her. I can feel it. I was thinking like a parent. But it's like a switch was just flipped in my brain. No more parent. Phew. Feel better now? Yeah, and about 100 pounds lighter too. I don't even give a damn what sort of soaking I'm about to get inside that cabin. He gave her a squeeze and released her. Let's go find out what they've been up to. I'm sure they put some effort into it, whatever it is. He took her hand as they walked toward the cabin's front porch. I guess I should be flattered by that. I think so. If she didn't care about you, she'd leave town and begin her dancing career somewhere else. Instead, she's campaigning for a job in your casino. I still say she has an unrealistic vision of how that will turn out, but at Least I'll be there if anything goes wrong. And she wants that. Apparently. He paused. Do you hear music? She'd heard it long ago, but had decided not to draw more attention to her. Excellent hearing. I do. Do you recognize it? I do. He sighed. She's been in the family vault. I realize it's her choice. But damn. She took a hell of a chance leaving it playing with the door open. And no one here. Giselle squeezed his hand. Not such a huge chance. She knows you're right. Behind her, and this area seems relatively quiet. I suppose. And you're not the parent. No. See, I thought I'd fix myself and then I reverted back the minute I thought she'd taken a chance with the video. You're getting there, Luke. Don't get discouraged. Habits can be really hard to break. Her heart ached for him. He was so determined to do the right thing and yet sometimes so confused about what that was. Her issues with Bryce were a walk in the park compared to Luke's struggle to gracefully make the transition after his dad's death. He'd automatically assumed that he should be the head of the family as well as CEO of the corporation, but there was no head of the family now. His role was cherished brother and friend to his sister. No wonder he'd been so autocratic with Cynthia in the beginning. Don't forget that your sister knows exactly which buttons to push to test you and throw you into a panic. Yeah, she does. His gaze lingered on her, the light in his eyes warm. I'm glad you're here, Giselle. God knows what kind of mess I would have made if you hadn't been. I won't insult your intelligence by contradicting that statement. He laughed. I'm even glad your brother is here. I'm sure he's the one who convinced Cynthia to turn this into a game instead of a vendetta. I think he was. Come on then. Still holding her hand, he started up the steps to the cabin's front porch. Let's find out what our brilliant siblings cooked up for us. Luke hesitated in front of the cabin's rustic wooden door. We're dry so far, but once we go in all bets are off. Normally I hold the door for a lady, but in this case. She slipped her hand from his. Go for it. Be my hero. Do I get a reward for bravery? He waggled his eyebrows at her. Absolutely. Excellent. I'm going in. Grasping the knob, he pushed open the door. Nothing happened. Maybe I have to be inside. He stepped into the room. Still. Nothing. I'm right behind you. Giselle followed him through the door. It's warm in here. They left the heat on. And the video going. Luke walked over to the TV. This one's from her senior year in high school. She was in a lot of numbers that year. Giselle moved farther into the room. All the curtains were closed, which made seeing the video easier. Cynthia danced with a group this time. Giselle counted 10 girls in identical sparkly outfits of royal blue. The implication that Cynthia wanted to be part of a dancing group again was unmistakable. For the first time, Giselle saw Cynthia dancing and not simply caught in a still photograph. Bryce had probably seen this video too, and thank goodness. He wasn't romantically attracted to Cynthia. The video showed that the beautiful child of 14 had become a stunning woman of 18. And wow, could she dance? Giselle drew closer. She's good, Luke. I'm no expert at these things, but she looks perfectly at home on the stage. She always has been. He stood, hands in the pockets of his jeans, his attention riveted on the screen. You've been right all along. If she doesn't give dancing a shot, she'll regret it. And she'll resent me for opposing her. I think so. Giselle slipped an arm around his waist. As you said, at least. She'll be at the Silver Crescent, where you can keep an eye on things. Luke wrapped his arm around Giselle's shoulders. No water trick yet, do you? Suppose they've rigged it to the DVD, so whoever takes it out gets drenched. Let's open the curtain so we can see what might be lurking in the shadows. After all, I'm a Landry too. I might be able to figure out what Bryce has set. That would give me some satisfaction, actually. Me too. He squeezed her shoulder and released her. But let me open the curtains. That would be a perfect booby trap. Good thinking. She stayed where she was while Luke pulled cords that opened the curtains at each window. Again, nothing happened. But she could see her surroundings much better. Logs were arranged in the stone fireplace as if waiting for the touch of a match. Positioned in front of it were a couch and 2 chairs upholstered in a green plaid that fit the rustic decor. The coffee table and 2 end tables were made from diagonal slices of a large tree trunk placed on a wrought iron base. Bark rimmed the edges, but the surfaces were polished and lacquered. Nice place, Giselle said. Cozy. It would be if I didn't expect a jet of water to come shooting out at me at any minute. He walked over to the TV and crouched down, examining it from all angles. I can't see a single thing out of place, but you'd better stand back while I take the DVD out. Sure thing. She edged away from the TV. If this was Bryce's grand finale, it could be a doozy. Luke gingerly extracted the DVD from the player and turned the machine off, along with the television. Letting out a breath, he stepped back. That was anticlimactic. I'll bet they decided not to do a water trick and figured we'd go crazy waiting for it. Luke nodded. Makes sense. And that strategy's working. I'm like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Speaking of rocking chairs, we could go sit on the porch. That setup looks innocent enough. Tucking the disc in the case lying next to the DVD player, he turned to her, a gleam in his eyes. I'm not in the mood for innocent. Oh. She'd seen that gleam before. She liked it. It produced a delicious response in her willing body. Here's how I see our situation. They want to meet us at 8 tonight. Correct. Correct. And do you think we should go along with their timetable? I do. If they're finally willing to talk, I don't want to scare them off by trying to set up something sooner. He tossed the DVD on the couch and came toward her. I happen to agree with that, which leaves us with several hours to fill. So it does. She had no trouble reading his mind, and her heart thudded in anticipation. Coincidentally, we're all alone in a cute little cabin in the woods. But first I need you to tell me the absolute truth. If you're still sore, then I'm fine. His gaze searched hers. Really, Luke? I'm recovered. Magic Epsom salts. A smile tugged at his mouth. I'd be a fool to argue the point. Heat radiated from him as he stood inches away. Without touching her, he managed to surround her with that heat. Do you suppose there's a bed around here somewhere? She breathed in his virile scent, and a shiver of delight ran through her. I wouldn't be surprised. Then let's go find it. Lacing his strong fingers through hers, he led her toward a doorway on the far side of the living room. Bingo! He drew her inside. She gave the room a quick glance, although, under the circumstances, she wasn't about to be picky. But it was a lovely setting. The curtains were open. Tall pines outside the window filtered the sunlight, creating a dappled effect on the navy quilt covering the king-size bed set into a dark walnut frame. Looking up at him, she allowed the desire she felt to shine in her eyes. It will do nicely. Oh yeah. Luke gathered her into his arms and backed toward the bed. Come. Roll around on the mattress with me, pretty lady. I have the urge to muss you up. Laughing, she put up a token protest. Let's take off our clothes first. Then we won't go back looking so like we've been having sex. I've stopped caring whether they know or not. But relax. Have fun. Let me wrestle you out of your clothes, and you can wrestle me out of mine. Oh, what the hell? She wrapped her arms around his neck. Why not? That's the spirit. Hang on. Here we go. Falling back onto the mattress, he hauled her down with him. The mattress rolled under them with a sloshing sound. Then what had appeared to be dappled shadows on the comforter began to spread. Luke. He closed his eyes and sighed. I know. Waterbed. And it's Chapter 21. Giselle chastised herself for being weak, but she craved Luke, human though he might be, in ways she'd never craved one of her own kind. She felt so alive with him, as if she'd been suppressing her essential being all her life. With Luke she could be herself, and he seemed fine with that. He was more than fine with it, in fact. He loved her, and she loved him back. Even if she'd never tell him so, she couldn't have him forever, so she'd make the most of the short time they were together. With the cabin as their hideaway, they spent the rest of the day making love and sharing the chicken and coleslaw dinner Cynthia had left for them. Because Giselle had dry clothes, she went outside and found the extra wood stored beside the cabin. That allowed them to keep the fire going, which added to the romantic ambience. She doubted that she'd ever smell wood smoke again without thinking of these hours with Luke. Lying on the futon with him, she gave him an edited version of her childhood because he asked. She knew he sought a clue to the problem. She refused to discuss, but she was practiced at evading critical questions. She'd been doing that ever since her parents had allowed her the freedom to mingle with humans. Although she longed to tell him the truth, she also knew that wouldn't go Well, humans had been taught to fear werewolves, and countless books and movies had added to the misconceptions. Most people believed that werewolves were monsters who passed on their beastly tendencies by biting the humans they attacked. On top of that, humans tended to view the concept of shapeshifting with revulsion. Luke praised her beauty when she was in human form, but how would he react if she transformed into a female wolf with a thick coat of dark red fur? Would he love that version of her? Giselle wasn't ready to find out. Inevitably, the hour arrived when they had to leave if they expected to be at the penthouse by 8. I could text Cynthia and change the time. Luke had begun putting on his clothes, which were now dry and smelled of wood smoke. I think 10 works as well as 8. No, it doesn't. Giselle zipped her jeans. Sticking with her time frame indicates we consider her important enough to accommodate her wishes. Once we start fiddling with the time, she could see that as a lack of commitment on our part. Luke sighed as he put on his shirt. You're right, but I hate leaving. Nothing's been settled about us. Yes, it has, she said softly. Assuming this 4-way discussion goes well, Bryce and I will fly back to San Francisco tomorrow. He held her gaze. Okay, then I'll come up there for a few days. That's not a good idea. Damn it, Giselle. Frustration was etched on his handsome face. Don't say it. That won't help. You have to take my word that we have no future. He stared at her for a few seconds. Then, with a muttered oath, he finished dressing. They rode back down the mountain in silence, which tore at her, but she had nothing helpful to say. They'd had their idyll in the woods, and now came the tough part, putting those special moments behind them and getting on with their separate lives. He'd expected her to crack and reveal everything. That wasn't going to happen. Finally, as they stood in the private elevator and it began its ascent to the top floor of the Silver Crescent, he broke the silence. No matter what happens from this point on, I need you to know something. Luke. You don't want me to say it, but this may be my last chance, and I damn well will say it. I love you, Giselle. She gazed at him as her heart broke. You won't say it, but I know you love me too. It's there in your eyes. His voice shook with emotion, and his blue eyes flashed fire. I don't know what the hell it is that you refuse to tell me, but it better be the sort of secret that would endanger the entire free world if you let it get out. Anything less would be bullshit. He looked at her, obviously waiting. When she said nothing, he turned away. Okay then. She hurt so much she had to clutch her stomach to keep from doubling over. She'd never wished to be human instead of were. But heaven help her, she wished for it now. Luke behaved like the perfect gentleman as he ushered her through the elaborate double doors into the penthouse. Bryce and Cynthia were there, sitting on the butterscotch sectional, sipping from wine glasses. When Giselle and Luke walked in, they both stood. Reluctantly, Giselle admitted that her tall, red-haired brother and Luke's tall blonde sister made a striking couple. They looked almost like movie stars, standing together. But unlike poised Hollywood celebrities, they appeared nervous. Giselle decided to break the ice. She walked over and gave her brother a hug. I didn't get to do this yesterday, she murmured. It's good to see you. He hugged her back. Same here, sis. Giselle turned to Cynthia. I've seen you dancing, Cynthia, and I just want to say I very much admire your talent. Oh. She seemed dazzled by that statement. Thank you so much. Giselle's heart went out to her. Although Cynthia was only 6 years younger, she seemed much more vulnerable than that. She too had lost her overbearing father, and she must be feeling an unsettling combination of grief and freedom. Behind Giselle, Luke cleared his throat. I've never officially met your friend, Cynthia. Guess not. Cynthia seemed to regain some of her poise. Bryce Landry, this is my big brother, Luke. Bryce stuck out his hand with an assertiveness that made Giselle proud. Glad to finally meet you, Dalton. Same here, Landry. Luke stood toe-to-toe and eye-to-eye with Giselle's brother. They were the same height and of a similar build. A fight between them would draw even odds. Giselle prayed there would be no fight. Her loyalties would be hopelessly divided. But after what appeared to be a bone-crushing handshake, the two men separated. Luke adopted a take-charge attitude. Obviously we need to talk. I see you both have a beverage. Giselle and I should probably get something too. I'll provide whatever you require, sir. Mr. Thatcher appeared in the kitchen. Doorway. Giselle snuck a quick glance at Bryce, to see his reaction to Mr. Thatcher. Bryce winked at her. Giselle ducked her head to hide a smile. At the moment the were outnumbered. The humans, not that the humans would ever find that out. Excellent, Mr. Thatcher. Luke looked at Giselle. What will you have? She considered champagne, because she hoped they'd be celebrating a reunion of siblings, but she wasn't completely confident that would happen. A glass of wine works. Red or white, madam? Mr. Thatcher asked. Red, please. Luke turned to Mr. Thatcher. Make that too, please. And cheese and bread, please, Mr. Thatcher, Cynthia said, lifting her chin. She faced her brother. Mom and Dad always used to have cheese and bread with their wine. Luke's expression softened. Yeah, they did. Good call, sis. Once Mr. Thatcher left, the four of them stood staring at each other. Luke took a deep breath. Let's all sit down. Giselle, the sectional's all yours. I'll get a kitchen chair. Giselle picked a spot where the sectional curved so that she was at right angles to Bryce and Cynthia. Luke walked into the kitchen, grabbed one of the chairs and brought it back, positioning it on the far side of a glass coffee table. Instead of sitting in it, he spun it around and straddled it. Very macho indeed. Giselle worked hard not to smile at the tactic, which made Luke seem far more cool than Bryce, despite her brother's attempt to lounge on the sectional as if he hadn't a care in the world. Although one of the males in the room was and one was human, their maneuvering for dominance wasn't all that different. First of all, Luke said, once again taking the initiative, I want to congratulate both of you on your inventiveness. Cynthia's eyes widened. You do? I thought you'd be pissed. I was, until Giselle helped me see that the effort involved was kind of flattering. Giselle flinched. I think what Luke means to say is that he appreciates your efforts to help him understand how much dancing means to you. She shot a quick glance at Luke and hoped he'd get the message. Apparently he had, because he nodded. Exactly. I hadn't realized before how much you cared about it. Cynthia sat up straighter. That's because you're so incredibly dense. I tried to explain this about 100 times, but you kept blowing me off. You have his attention now, right, Luke? Giselle gave him an encouraging smile. Right. Swallowing, he focused on his sister. If you want a job in the Moonbeams lineup, it's yours. Cynthia leaped off the sectional with a shriek and nearly knocked Luke out of his chair as she gave him an enthusiastic hug. Thank you. That's awesome. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm going to be a moonbeam. She began twirling. In the middle of the room, she nearly collided with Mr. Thatcher as he came in from the kitchen, rolling a cart loaded with wine, a crusty baguette, and a mouth-watering assortment of cheeses. Mr. Thatcher, Luke said I could be a moonbeam dancer. Isn't that fabulous? Indeed it is, Miss Cynthia. He pretended to be unaffected when she hugged him too. But Giselle saw the emotion in his eyes. Cynthia returned to her seat and exchanged a high five with Bryce. 1 project down, 1 to go. Luke blinked. You have another agenda? Please tell me it doesn't have to do with squirt guns and water balloons. My heart can't take it. Oh, this one's really simple. Cynthia reached over and patted Bryce's knee. A no-brainer. Giselle held her breath and prayed that nothing had changed between Bryce and Cynthia since she'd talked to her brother. She hadn't picked up any girlfriend-boyfriend vibes from them, but she was under a lot of stress. She could have missed the obvious. Luke's jaw tightened. So what is it? Bryce and I have talked about this a lot, and we both think you should sell Howlin' at the Moon back to Benedict Cartwright. Giselle was stunned. She glanced over at Luke, who seemed equally taken aback. But when she turned her attention to Bryce, he gazed at her with a little half smile. And she got it. Bryce was still loyal to his heritage, and part of that heritage was wrapped up in this bar known to wers all over the world. By sheer coincidence, he'd become friends with the sister of the human who'd won that bar, and he'd decided to use his influence with her to try to get it back. That was, she concluded with some chagrin, more than she'd done. She also had influence with the bar's new owner, but she'd never once suggested he might want to sell it back. She doubted he would have agreed, but she'd never put the concept on the table. With Bryce's encouragement, Cynthia had. Luke had recovered himself. I'm not selling the bar back to the Cartwrights, he said. Harrison's behavior might not have caused my father to die, but the stress didn't help any. Dad should have been awarded the moon in the first place. I had to win it back in a poker game, which is fitting, and now that I have it, I intend to keep it. It's part of the Dalton legacy now. But that's not right either. Cynthia put her empty wineglass on the coffee table. The moon is part of the Cartwright legacy, the first thing Harrison Cartwright built in Las Vegas. It has all kinds of sentimental value for that family, but for you it's only about revenge. It's more than that, Cynthia. Every time I looked at that bar I remembered how our dad fought with Harrison and how he made himself sick over it. It was like a gnawing pain in my gut, a reminder that our dad is gone. Cynthia's expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much it was hurting you. I should have, but I didn't. So you understand why I can't sell it back to the Cartwrights? Yes, but let me ask you something else. How did you feel when I raided the family photo gallery and swiped a DVD from the vault in order to make my point? Truthfully, Luke sought Giselle's gaze as if drawing energy from it. Then he looked over at his sister. I hated it. The pictures could have been replaced. But I'm not sure there's a copy of the DVD. Thinking it could have disappeared made me sick to my stomach. I'll bet that's how the Cartwrights feel about losing the moon, Cynthia said. It's a piece of family history, and now it's gone. Luke frowned. Aren't you forgetting something? Dad won the Silver Crescent, fair and square, and then Harrison Cartwright put our dad through hell before he finally turned it over. I firmly believe the stress is what killed him. That's entirely possible, Cynthia said quietly. And now you have the bar. How does that make you feel? Great. Giselle knew his moods well enough to figure out he was bluffing. And she knew his heart too. He might have thought exacting revenge for his father and ending his own pain at the expense of someone else was a good idea, but the reality might have proved to be quite different. Really? Cynthia's brow wrinkled. I find that hard to believe. Luke's jaw tightened. Believe it. Having a Cartwright property next to the Silver Crescent has been a pain in the ass both to Dad and me. Now we own it. I couldn't be happier about that. You don't look happy, Cynthia said. That's because you don't seem to understand why the Daltons deserve to own that bar. I get your motivation, Luke, but you don't have the time to give that place the personal attention Benedict Cartwright gave it. His personality brought in the customers. Unless you find someone with charisma to run it, you could end up with a losing proposition on your hands. I hope this isn't leading up to some hidden agenda, like you asking me to hire Landry for that position. Bryce stood. Absolutely not. He glanced at Giselle. In fact, maybe my sister and I should make ourselves scarce and let you two work things out. It's not our business after all, and we have some things to discuss anyway. Giselle got up. That's an excellent idea. Where do you want to go? If I may make a suggestion? Mr. Thatcher appeared in the living room as if he'd been summoned, which he most definitely had not. But he'd probably been eavesdropping from the kitchen. I can escort you both down to the Howlin' at the Moon Bar. Even if the two of you have not experienced so much in regard to it, it's a landmark not to be missed. I've seen. In the nick of time, Giselle caught the look Bryce had thrown her way. There was more to this invitation than visiting a Vegas landmark. I'd love to go, she said, and was rewarded by a big smile from her brother. Luke stood. You don't have to leave. Cynthia and I can hash this out later. We'll be back. Giselle walked over and touched his arm. Bryce makes a good point. This is your family business. You and Cynthia need to work this out between the two of you. She held up her phone. Text me when you've talked it through. Trust me, it won't take long. He didn't look particularly happy that she was leaving, but he didn't have much choice. He couldn't order her to stay and participate in the discussion. See you soon then. With an encouraging smile, she turned and followed Bryce and Mr. Thatcher out the door. Once they were all in the elevator, Bryce glanced at all the wooden surfaces. Is this thing bugged? Not that I know of, Mr. Thatcher said, but I advise you to refrain from any conversation for now. Bryce nodded. Giselle looked from one to the other. Are we going where I think we are? Mr. Thatcher put a finger to his lips. Giselle didn't need any more of a hint than that, but she was worried. Even if Benedict was somewhere nearby with the remote, they couldn't chance using it. Now, she trusted Mr. Thatcher to use the utmost caution when going into the playground, but this didn't feel like caution. Felt downright. Chapter 22. You really like Giselle, don't you? Cynthia kicked off her designer shoes and curled her feet under her. I do, but it's not going anywhere. Luke remained standing and began to pace. Why not? He glanced over at his sister lounging on the sectional, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Even dressed casually in jeans and a navy hoodie, she was beautiful. She'd always had cat-like grace, but he'd refused to see that a dancing career fit her perfectly. Thank God she wanted to dance here and not on Broadway. Then he caught himself. If she decided to try to make it in New York, he'd be supportive. He was through standing in the way of what was obviously her destiny, at least for now. Her blue eyes, so like his, focused intently on him. You don't want to tell me about her, do you? Not particularly, since she'll go back to San Francisco tomorrow and that'll be that. What's the point in discussing her? It's just that I've never seen you so absorbed in a woman before. And you just met her, right? Yeah. He massaged the back of his neck. That's the crazy part, how fast we connected. I feel as if I've known her a hell of a lot longer. Luke, I realize you think of me as a kid who doesn't know anything, but no, I don't. He stopped pacing to gaze at her. You're 100 times smarter than I am. You're talking about academics, but you don't think I'm smart about people. She had him there. I'll admit I used to feel that way, but my opinion on that score is changing. Tell me about Landry. He's just a friend. Is he gay? She laughed. No. Why would you think that? Because you're gorgeous. You've had guys running after you since second grade. Why should Bryce Landry be any different? He just is. If you must know, I think he's still in love with his ex-fiancée. And I hope they get back together. Is that your issue with Giselle? She has someone else back in San Francisco. No. Least I don't think so. She said she didn't, and I can't imagine that she does, considering. He stopped himself before he revealed more than he'd intended. Are you referring to the chocolate-covered sex orgy? Is that what convinced you she was unattached? He gulped. Damn it, he was blushing. He could feel the heat creeping up his neck. A quick glance at Cynthia confirmed that she was enjoying the hell out of his embarrassment. He couldn't think of a single thing to say that wouldn't make the situation even worse, so he kept quiet. We arrived minutes before the cleaning crew. Sisterly triumph rang through every word. You almost got away with it, but I just knew you two were headed for bedroom games. That scene in the gondola was the clincher. That's why Bryce and I decided to make the leaky waterbed our grand finale. It was quite a finale, all right. Luke sighed. He'd go through the waterbed incident 100 times if it could be followed by the kind of afternoon he'd spent with Giselle. So you're going to just let her go? I suggested coming up to San Francisco for a visit, and she said that wasn't a good idea. Cynthia tapped her finger against her mouth. So she's a bit of a mystery woman. That intrigues me. Look, I don't want you to interfere in your life. That's funny, Luke. Makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it? Now you know how I felt. He blew out a breath. I was wrong, okay? I'm sorry. And I'm not just saying. I really am sorry that I treated you that way, as if you didn't know what was good for you. I believe you, but I wish I had a recording of that. In case I backslide? Exactly. She gestured to the curved part of the sectional that faced her. Have a seat and stop pacing. I need to think about this Giselle problem, and I can't do it while you're roaming around like a caged lion. I'll come over and sit down, but I don't want you delving into Giselle's situation. She's told me to back off, and I'll honor that. He walked to the sectional and sank down. How noble of you. Did it occur to you that I have a source who might tell me what's going on with her? You mean Bryce? He's her brother, after all. I could mention that she's throwing up roadblocks and see what he says about that. No, the concept made him cringe inside. It sounds like junior high all over again. So you're willing to let her go and never find out why the two of you can't be together? That would drive me crazy. I'll deal with it. He didn't know how, but he'd have to. He had no choice. I mean, it's one thing if someone dumps you and tells you why you're upset. Sure, but at least you understand the issue. You can get drunk, break a few dishes, and move on. Luke chuckled. Is that what you do? Throw breakables? Maybe. She gave him a dimpled smile. My point is, you won't be able to move on You'll have that question nagging you forever. What was the problem? Why did she leave without giving me an explanation? I guarantee a mystery breakup is the worst kind. You've had those. No, but a girlfriend of mine did back at Yale. Some dude walked out on her and refused to tell her why. 2 years later she found out he'd had a girlfriend back home with a baby. My friend was so relieved. Mad as hell. But relieved. She could finally forget about the creep once the mystery was solved. Luke couldn't believe he was listening to relationship advice from his little sister, but what she'd said made sense. He was frustrated about not knowing the big secret that stood between him and Giselle. Although he'd vowed not to dwell on that, he probably would anyway. He was enough like Cynthia that the mystery would drive him crazy just like it would her. Time is of the essence, she said. Bryce and Giselle will fly back to San Francisco tomorrow, and the opportunity to investigate will be lost. So, we could text them and ask them to come back up here, but I'd rather head on down to the moon. We can say we finished our discussion and decided to join them for a drink. I'll get Bryce alone, which will be easier at the bar than up here, and ambient noise can make conversations harder to overhear. It could challenge him to a game of pool and find out what's up. But we didn't finish our discussion. She looked at him. Nobody's here but me, big brother. Tell me the truth. Are you thrilled about owning that bar? He met her gaze. Pretending seemed stupid at this point. No. To be honest, I've considered bulldozing it. No. Her eyes widened. That would kill Benedict. You sound as if you like the guy. Of course I do. I always have. He was nice to me, didn't treat me like a little tag-along. Mr. Thatcher likes him too. Remembering that moment at the table when he'd looked into Benedict's tortured gaze, Luke sighed. I kind of like him too. But don't you think the Cartwrights deserve to go down? I was angry with Harrison, but he's already dead. I'm sorry, but I never thought Vaughn and Benedict were our enemies. I was sad when the feud started. I liked the Cartwright family, and Benedict loved that bar. I'll bet losing it was the worst thing that's ever happened to him. Then he shouldn't have put it on the line. I bet I know why he did. Cynthia stretched out her long legs and propped her bare feet on the coffee table. He probably was sick of staring at the silver Crescent, and he had even more reason to hate looking at it because the Cartwrights used to own it. I guess that could be true. I also bet he wanted to prove himself to Vaughn, just like I've always wanted to prove myself to you. She glanced over at him. I know how that feels. You don't have to prove yourself to me. Emotion tightened his throat. I'll love you no matter what. She swallowed. But catcha, big brother. She held his gaze for several seconds and then she smiled. Wow, we're getting mushy, huh? Guess so. He cleared his throat. You really think I should sell it to Benedict? I do. I don't know if he has the money to buy it. Vaughn would float him alone. I'd lay odds on that. And you won't have the humiliation of the bar losing business under your ownership, which I think it might. It might. He hadn't wanted to admit his fear of that happening, but he knew Benedict had been popular with the customers. Building customer loyalty to the new regime would take time he didn't have. Have I convinced you? He blew out a breath. Yeah, you have. Don't take this wrong, but you would have made one hell of a lawyer. I know. She looked smug. But I'll make an even better dancer. Ready to go. Down to the moon. Might as well. It won't be ours much longer. Once I sell it back to Benedict, we'll have to pay for our drinks, and chances are he'll charge us double. You maybe. Cynthia winked at him. Me he likes. Giselle had a million questions for her brother and a few for Mr. Thatcher, too, but she waited until they'd left the Silver Crescent through the back door. Let's stop a minute, she said. We can't go into the playground right now. It's too risky. Precisely, Mr. Thatcher said. I simply wanted a chance to talk with both of you alone and let you know that Benedict and I are scheduled to make our first inspection after closing time tonight. We've arranged to meet at 2 in the morning. I wanted to offer you a chance to accompany us. I'm up for it, Bryce said. I probably can't. Giselle expected to spend her last night in Vegas with Luke. She glanced at Bryce. So you know about how the blocked-off entrance works now. Mr. Thatcher and I had a very brief moment alone when Cynthia was in the bathroom. He had just enough time to tell me about it. The butler glanced back at the Silver Crescent. I suggest we move on and actually have that drink at the Moon in case Luke and Cynthia come looking for us. Good idea, Giselle said. By the way, brother of mine, were you the one who planted the idea of Luke selling back to Benedict? He smiled. I might have been. She gave him a hug. Well done. Now let's go have a drink and hope that Cynthia talks Luke into it. I sincerely hope so. Mr. Thatcher fell into step on one side of her. Bryce took the other side. And if she fails, sis, I figure you can take a shot at convincing him. You seem to have the inside track. She had a feeling she was busted, but she didn't know for sure. Don't start with me, Bryce Landry. Not after you gave me a heart attack when I thought you might be getting cozy with a human. The difference is, I didn't actually get cozy with a human while you definitely did. You have no proof of that. Ahead of them, Mr. Thatcher cleared his throat. I'm afraid he does. Oh. Bryce leaned closer. Was it good? The chocolate, I mean. She elbowed him in the ribs. He grunted. Easy, sis. I have to be well enough to travel, you know. Are you traveling with me tomorrow? I am. And by the way, my camera phone is loaded with pictures of chocolate. Bryce, if you tell anyone about this, and I mean anyone, I have an entire list of your previous crimes that will go public immediately. I won't tell, at least not right away. I value the blackmail potential, so I'm saving it for something really big. You'd better be kidding. He chuckled. You'll have to find that out, won't you? Incidentally, there's one surefire way to neutralize the threat. I'm sure it involves paying you large sums of money. I wasn't thinking about that, but I'll file it away for future consideration. If you want to end my blackmail prospects forever, though, you could mate with the dude. What? She came to a halt on the sidewalk outside the Moon. All the best families are doing it. Even I can see he's crazy about you and would treat you right. He didn't endear himself to me at first, but the guy's grown on me. I think you'd be happy together. You're talking crazy. I'm perfectly sincere. I've come to admire the guy. He took my jokes in stride. And I'm not an easy sell when it comes to my little sister's future. Mate, yes, he does have a tiny flaw, but it's not tiny. That's your opinion. Others would differ. Looks to me as if the only obstacle is your prejudice against the concept. That is not the only obstacle. I'm thinking of him. It would drastically change his life. He'd have to sell his company and uproot himself from a city he loves. Worse than that, he'd have to keep the secret from his sister, and despite what we've been through with those two, they're devoted to each other. Mr. Thatcher turned around and joined them. I hope you don't mind if I put in. Go right ahead. Giselle looked at her brother. This fine Mr. Thatcher has been a second father to Luke and Cynthia. I doubt he'll be enthusiastic about your wild plan to upend their lives. On the contrary, I snatched this time for the three of us, partly so that I could invite you both to the playground, but also because I was hoping we could discuss this very topic. I've never seen Luke so besotted with anyone as he is with you. I always urge caution in these matters, but I believe he would be happier with you, despite the obvious difficulties, than without you. Giselle stared at him. With all due respect, no, he would not. He loves Vegas. And he loves his sister. He could never tell her the truth about his life, and that would be cruel to both of them. I wouldn't dream of saddling him with that burden. Too bad you won't give him a chance to weigh in on the subject, Bryce said. Mr. Thatcher's attention was distracted by something directly behind them. Our conversation is at an end, he said in a low voice. Then he stepped back and waved. It appears you've finished your discussion. We did, Luke called out. What's up with you slowpokes? We figured you'd be on your second round by now. Bryce and Giselle both turned. She hoped her brother had a reasonable explanation because she was drawing a blank. Bryce, her quick-witted riddle maker, came through. We had some family business to work through too, and we decided to settle it before we started drinking. He put his arm around Giselle's shoulder and gave her a squeeze. I gotta say, this is one stubborn female. Luke laughed. Don't I know it? Stubbornness is in the eye of the beholder, Giselle said. Cynthia gave her a thumbs up. Way to tell him, girlfriend. Giselle managed a big smile as she watched Luke and Cynthia approach. Tall, fair, and beautiful, they were so obviously brother and sister. She couldn't imagine how their mother could bear to live an ocean away from them. But that was her choice, and it left them more dependent on each other. No one should come between those two, especially not a female werewolf who'd foolishly allowed herself to fall in love with a Chapter 23. If Luke had doubted his decision to sell Howlin at the Moon, those doubts evaporated when he stepped inside the door. The place was almost deserted. Chuck Stevens came forward with a cheerful smile, because that was Chuck's way to smile in the face of disappointment. But Chuck had to be wondering whether Luke had a strategy to keep the bar business from going into free fall. Don't know what to tell you, he said. Business was great yesterday, but today not so much. Don't worry about it. Luke turned to the group he'd brought in, none of whom would be paying customers. I guess you know everybody except Giselle's brother, Bryce Landry. Meet Chuck Stevens. Chuck's the CFO for Dalton Industries. Bryce reached out and shook Chuck's hand. My sister's the CFO for the Landry operation up in Frisco. Did she tell you that? I don't think she did. She had other things on her mind when we met. Like me, Cynthia said. But all's well that ends well, Chuck. My darling. Brothers hired me to dance with the moonbeams, so you'll be signing my paycheck soon. Luke didn't care if she boasted about that, or that Chuck's eyebrows lifted at the news. His CFO quickly recovered and congratulated Cynthia on her new job. Chuck had been with Dalton for 7 years, long enough to figure out that complicated maneuvers took place in a family-owned business. So I guess you're all here to celebrate. Chuck gestured toward the interior of the bar, where only a handful of people occupied a grouping of 20 tables. Take your pick. I'll get a server right over. Thanks, Chuck. If you want to head home, I can handle it for the rest of the night. Nah, you have guests. I'm happy to supervise for now. I'm sure business will pick up and we can look into hiring someone. Cynthia glanced at Luke. Aren't you going to tell him? Sure. He wasn't in the habit of blurting out his business decisions in such a casual way, but saying something might relieve Chuck's concern that the bar would be a financial drain on the company. I've decided to sell the bar. Back to Benedict Cartwright. From the corner of his eye he caught a triumphant look pass between Giselle and Bryce. What the hell? Why would either of them care what he did with the bar? Sure. Bryce seemed to have influenced Cynthia to plead for returning the bar to the Cartwrights, but the glance between Bryce and Giselle held more significance than it should, given the circumstances. Chuck appeared stunned by the announcement. Sell it back to Benedict? Thought the whole idea was to get it away from that family. Wasn't the poker game a grudge match? Or am I missing something? You're not missing anything, Luke said. The game was a grudge match, and as you and I were taught in our business classes, revenge is a lousy motivation for a corporate decision. Owning this bar makes no sense for Dalton Industries, but since I got it for free, we can't avoid making a profit when I sell it. Chuck grinned. So revenge is a good motivation? Only if you know when to stop seeking it. Have our lawyers draw up the papers tomorrow and set up a meeting with Benedict whenever he's available. I'll do that and let you know. Now find yourself a table and enjoy yourselves. There's no band tonight, but the jukebox works great. And the pool table's open. Cynthia seemed to be in rare form. I want that middle table next to the dance floor. Bryce laughed. Gonna put on a show for us? I might, but first I challenge you to a game of pool. Luke should have known she'd remember and follow through on her plan. He'd always been in awe of his sister's brainpower, but he'd never thought she'd employ it for his benefit. Maybe she'd find out nothing, but earlier when they'd come upon Bryce, Giselle, and Mr. Thatcher in a huddle, his instincts had gone on alert. Bryce had made it sound as if they'd been discussing Landry family issues, but Luke didn't buy it. The moment Mr. Thatcher had caught sight of him, he'd looked startled. Then he'd muttered something to the others. Luke was willing to bet they'd been talking about him. How Mr. Thatcher figured into all this remained a mystery too. But he'd latched onto Giselle immediately, and that was unusual for the reserved butler. When Luke had seen the three of them together, he'd had the oddest feeling, as if they were linked somehow. That wasn't logical. Bryce and Giselle were brother and sister, of course, but Mr. Thatcher had no connection to them. His family was in England, and the Landrys were based in San Francisco. So why did all three radiate a feeling of togetherness, as if they shared a bond of great significance? He hoped that Cynthia would make some headway with Bryce and eventually could enlighten her confused brother. If anyone could pry information out of a person, it was Cynthia. Cynthia and Bryce put in their order before heading off to the bar's pool table. Cynthia chose a Long Island iced tea, and Bryce duplicated her order. It was a strong drink, but Luke had a better handle on his sister's methods. Now, by ordering something strong, she challenged Bryce to do the same. If Luke had to guess, he'd say that Cynthia planned to nurse hers and catch a slightly drunk Bryce off guard. Then she'd subtly pump him for information. Luke settled at the table with Giselle and Mr. Thatcher. Giselle, who took the chair to his right, ordered red wine, so he did too. He wouldn't drink much. He wanted to keep his wits about him tonight. Mr. Thatcher, who chose a chair across the table from them, asked for a gin and tonic. A bowl of mixed nuts occupied the center of their round table. Luke offered some to Giselle, who took a handful. Then he pushed the bowl in Mr. Thatcher's direction. "I don't think I've ever shared a drink with you," Luke said. "Normally it's bad form to drink with the hired help." Interesting. Yet the guy had suggested accompanying Giselle and Bryce to the bar. Luke decided not to mention that. "Seems like a silly rule in your case," he said. "You're like a member of the family." "I appreciate that. I feel as if I am, but still, you pay my salary. You don't normally pay members of your family." "I'm about to. Cynthia will draw a salary as one of the moonbeams." "What do you think of that whole deal, Mr. Thatcher? Am I making a mistake?" He discovered that the answer mattered to him. Hired help or not, he wanted this man's approval. He always had wanted it. "In my estimation, you did the right thing." "I'm glad you think so." Luke was ridiculously relieved to hear that. "I'm afraid that my dad never saw her as she was," Mr. Thatcher said. "Only as he wished her to be. She's been a dancer as long as I've known her." Luke sent him a look of gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." Mr. Thatcher pushed back his chair. "Speaking of dancing, do you fancy some tunes on the jukebox? You and Giselle could dance." "That's okay," Giselle said quickly. "Leaving you alone at the table would be rude." "Nonsense. Let's have some music. It would do my heart good to see you dance together." After he walked over to the jukebox, Luke glanced at Giselle. "What's that all about?" She flushed. "He's a bit of a matchmaker, apparently." "I'm not opposed to that, but he's never been into matchmaking before." He gazed at her. "Do you know him from somewhere?" "No." He thought it was significant that she didn't ask him why he'd think that. "When Cynthia and I caught up with you three on the sidewalk, I couldn't shake the impression that you've been talking about me." Bryce stepped into the breach and made up something that sounded like an excuse, but "Were you talking about me?" She had a deer-in-the-headlights look, but finally she nodded. "Why?" "Like I said, Mr. Thatcher thinks we're good together." He covered her hand with his. "He's got that right. Bryce is a big boy. Send him back to Frisco and stay with me at least for a while. I know you have responsibilities back home, but you accomplished what you came here for. Don't you deserve a little reward? A small vacation?" Her green eyes revealed the struggle going on there. "You know I want to stay. Then do it. That would only make things worse when I leave." "I'll take that risk." She shook her head. "I'll leave with Bryce. It's the best for both of us." Mr. Thatcher returned to his chair. "I don't recognize most of those songs, so you'll have to make do with some old ones, I'm afraid." The opening chords of "I Will Always Love You" wafted through the bar's sound system. Luke stood and held out his hand to Giselle. "That one works for me." With a smile that was part frustration and part surrender, she took his hand and joined him on the small dance floor. They had it to themselves. He almost wished they'd been surrounded by other dancers, which would have given them more privacy. In the spotlight, so to speak, he couldn't hold her as close as he wanted to. He felt self-conscious about pressing his lips to the tender place behind her ear. But he could talk to her. "Will you spend the night with me?" he murmured. Against her ear. She shivered in response. "I shouldn't. I need to make plane reservations. Tonight. We can do that in 10 minutes. My parents told me to take the corporate jet, but I think that's a waste of resources." "The corporate jet?" He pulled back to gaze into her eyes. "Your family has a jet." She smiled. "Doesn't everyone?" "No. I've considered it, but our holdings are all in Vegas. A jet is overkill, unless I want it to impress people. Our jet is a necessary expense. We're considering buying another one. We're primarily a shipping company, and we do business all over the Pacific Rim. That's impressive. I should have Googled you so I wouldn't be caught by surprise. He drew her closer. To hell with who was watching. Your company has resources. My company has resources. We can find a way to make this happen. We're good together. You know we are. Don't throw that away. She continued to smile, but she shook her head. No can do. It wouldn't work. Out. You are the most maddening woman I have ever met. Pressing his cheek to hers, he danced with her until the song ended. Then he led her back to the table where their drinks were waiting. He glanced over at the pool table. He needed his resident spy to return with some intel. As if he'd signaled her on some high-tech personal communication system, she came back to the table, Bryce trailing behind. She kicked my butt, Bryce said. I thought they taught intellectual stuff at Yale, but apparently she majored in billiards. Cynthia made a face. I learned the basics in Vegas and polished my game with my college friends. Most of them were math majors, so they understood the geometry involved. They taught me to view the table scientifically. That might be true, but I say she was channeling Minnesota Fats. Bryce rolled his eyes. Just warning you suckers. The girl's got game. He exaggerates. Cynthia focused on Luke. Care to take me on, big brother? Sure. My ego can handle it. Luke stood. That's what I thought. Bryce drained his Long Island iced tea. But she'll humiliate you, my friend. And you won't even see it coming. Luke didn't give a damn about the pool game, but he hoped Cynthia had information about the woman he craved more than life itself. He chalked his cue and pretended to care. You can break. She sent the balls flying and 2 landed in the pockets. She lined up for another shot. What did you find out? She pulled back and sighed. Wait until I've made my shot, okay? At that moment he became acutely aware that she was 22. She was smarter than almost anyone he knew and beautiful and a great dancer and savvy about people when she chose to be. But she was still 22 and living for the moment, which meant getting the number 2 ball in the side pocket. Curbing his impatience, he leaned on his cue stick and waited for her to make the shot. She made that one and the one after that and the one after that. If she ran the table, they would have no chance to talk. In which case they'd simply play another game. He wasn't leaving the table without some answers. Eventually she missed a shot. Not by much, but finally he had a turn. He wasn't going to take it until she gave him some information. What did you find out? Seriously? Not much. He groaned. No, really. The Landrys are rich, and they have an estate of some kind north of San Francisco. The most I could get out of him, and this was after he'd swallowed most of his Long Island iced tea, was that Giselle was expected to marry a certain type of person, and you didn't fit the bill. What the hell? What's wrong with me? I'm healthy and reasonably good-looking. I have money. Maybe not as much as they do, but I can't believe they're Giselle and Bryce don't strike me as snobs. Me either. So is it pedigree? Are they requiring dudes whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower? I can't believe that's it. She gestured toward the table. Take your shot. He sighed. I'm not here to play pool, and you know it. I know, but you have to make it look convincing. Shoot. He did, and by sheer coincidence he sank 2 balls in a row. Then he missed. And Cynthia proceeded to clear the table of every single one of her remaining balls. Bryce had described the total humiliation very well. Luke gazed at her. Where did you learn to play like that? As I said, I hung out with math majors. This is a game of geometry and physics. Once you understand the principles involved, all you have to do is execute. Okay, I accept defeat. But before we go back to the table, isn't there anything else you can tell me? I know he's really happy about you selling the bar back to Benedict Cartwright. He mentioned that several times. Why does he care about that so much? I'm not sure, but he kept talking about the Cartwright family tradition as if that mattered to him. He'd said all that before, when we were pulling our pranks on you, which was why I decided you should sell the bar. But she looked at him across the pool table. Do you ever get the feeling that there's some secret society in town? Yes. Have you ever tried to walk into the lobby of Illusions, the Cartwright's new hotel? No, why? The doorman won't let you in unless you're a registered guest. You can't even Enter the lobby with a registered guest. Giselle tried to get me in there. And the doorman flatly refused. That's weird. Could it be some top-secret headquarters? I don't know, but that's a ridiculous level of security no matter who's staying there. Who restricts access to the damned lobby? Cynthia rolled the cue ball back and forth in front of her and she seemed lost. And thought, it does make you wonder. And there's some kind of connection between Mr. Thatcher and the two Landrys. Maybe they all belong to a secret organization and maybe not, but the three of them have something in common. I don't know what it is, but it's there. I absolutely agree. Maybe if you find out what that connection is, you'll find out what's standing between you and Giselle. How will I find out? Keep a watch on your lady friend. Cynthia rolled the cue ball across the table in his direction. By the way, I've invited Bryce to spend the night in my apartment at the Silver Crescent. Don't tell me that you're finally going to get chummy with the guy. No. He gave up his hotel room once we set off on this adventure together, so now he needs a place to crash and it seems silly for him to book another room. We get along, but he's still hung up on his ex, and although he's sweet, he doesn't do it for me either. I'm just saying that I'll be able to keep an eye on him. That leaves only Mr. Thatcher. I think he's a piece of the puzzle, too, but I'm not willing to camp outside his door tonight to find out. Luke rolled the cue ball back across the table in her direction. You realize we're both talking like we're paranoid. She smiled. I know, but that doesn't mean we're wrong. But you don't think we're crazy, do you? No, I don't. And whatever's going on, I agree that Giselle's involved in it. So stay alert. Do you still think she's the one for me? I mean, all this mystery and intrigue doesn't sound promising, does it? No, Cynthia hesitated. But I looked over at you too when you were dancing. You move together as if you've been doing it forever. As a dancer, I know how rare that is. I'm not a dancer, but I know what you're talking about. We've been able to catch each other's rhythm without really trying. Luke, do you believe in soulmates? I'm not sure. Me either. But if there is such a thing, then she's yours.